this love. Been thinking about it. Been thinking about this love. So hard, so hard. I've been thinking about my life and how it's gonna turn. And all I really wanna do is find a way to go on through. And all I really wanna do is find a way to go on through.
I'm a
So out on the tide we go, out on the ice. So out on the highest wave, so high, so high. So out on the tide we go, knowing it will turn. Find a way to go on through. And all I really wanna do is find a way